Hare Krishna, everyone. You're watching the Bhakti Kids Sangha podcast. I am your host, Jahnava Devi Dasi, and we're on episode 27. And today, our topic is going to be maintaining a healthy marriage in today's world. So far on the podcast, you will have seen we've talked about lots of issues relating to children and raising children. And I think a really important aspect of harmony in the home and how our children are brought up is, comes from the parents, comes from the relationship and the marriage. So I thought it's a really important topic to address. And I'm really, really fortunate to be joined today by Mahatma Das and his wife, Jahnava Devi Dasi. You may have seen they've done seminars and talks on marriage before. So they are the most perfect guests to talk to you about this topic. And I love the way they're so practical. They're rooted in Sastra, but they're really, really practical and easy to apply as well. So that's why I asked them to join me today. And I'm very, very lucky that they did. I'm going to share a little bit of information about them before I bring them in. So Mahatma Prabhu and Jahnava Mata are based in Alachua, Florida, and they live there with their daughter. Mahatma Prabhu met Srila Prabhupada at the age of 19. Wow. And was initiated by Srila Prabhupada not long after. And he's well known for his kirtans, his live music. He has a beautiful compilation of children's songs that my children absolutely love. And he's done seminars on japa, forgiveness, humility, and marriage. The marriage ones really, really are my favorite. And Jahnava Mataji joined in the 80s. She's done so many services. I couldn't fit them on the page. There were so many. But she studied psychology, coaching and counseling, and she has over a decade of experience. She's taught Bhakti Sastri, which is amazing. She's been a Gurukul teacher, and she currently has her own practice where she counsels and coaches and offers marriage counseling as well. How are you both doing today?
Very good.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on this fine Saturday morning here in Australia. So should we just jump into our first question, because I'm conscious of the time. My first question was, how does one stay curious and inquisitive in a marriage instead of erring into that realm of being critical and judgmental? I was going to put that question to you first, Jahnava Mata, and then come to Mahatma Prabhu, if that's okay.
Yeah, so it's actually a statement rather than a question, and then we'll direct it into a question. And that is really one of the keys for maintaining a healthy relationship, because over time, it's just so easy to become familiar with our spouse and look at all of the things that they do that aren't perfect or that aren't exactly to our liking, and become critical and judgmental. We may not understand why they behave a certain way or do something, and it may disturb us or confuse us. So we just tend to judge it. So the idea here is, instead of just going for that negative idea and criticism, we ask them, why? Tell me about that. What's the story behind that? What's the meaning? Why does that mean so much to you? And then you become like a detective, right? And you just find out the story behind and the meaning behind, and you learn a lot about your partner, and then it allows you to accept them for who they are and not who you wish they were. And maybe you want to ask some questions that you haven't thought about in a while. For instance, when you first get together, we tend to be very curious, right? We dig and we pry and we want to know everything about them, and we think it's so interesting and fascinating. But after a while, we just think, oh yeah, I know that. That's why he does that. Oh yeah, she. And we construct a story based on who they were when they met them, but it may not be the current story of who they are now, because people are always changing. So I might ask my husband, is lasagna still your favorite meal? Is orange still your favorite color? Is your 5-year goal still this? Is your greatest disaster scenario still this? Tell me, I want to know. I want to be updated on who you are now and today, not who you were when I met you. I really want to know your inner world, your love maps. So that's really important. And that's why we should be curious and inquisitive instead of just critical and judgmental.
Beautiful. Do you have anything to add, Mahatma Prabhu?
Yeah, well, I was thinking, take it to the beginning. And you were saying about this person, how they were when you met them. They may never have been how you thought they were in the first place. You may have fallen in love with an idealized version of that person, which is one of the reasons you get frustrated, because they're not acting the way you thought, the character in your movie, that they really were never acting that way. You just thought they were. So, and then the second thing is expectations. If they're unrealistic, they're always dangerous, because a person may be fine. You're expecting something else. So now the fine is not fine anymore, when actually it is fine. So, I think a lot of times we expect more from the person than they can be. We expect them to fill holes in us. We expect them to make us happy when we need to do that ourselves. We expect them to do a lot of things that we need to be doing for ourselves, and that can be frustrating. Another thing is some of the faults we have, they have, and it bothers us to see those faults in them, because it reminds us of our faults. And it's a different dynamic from being alone, and it's a different dynamic from being with friends. You might live you might have lived when you went to school. You might live with somebody. You've been very close to people, but the male-female dynamic is different. And I think a lot of people come in expecting to get more than they're going to give, and they get frustrated with it.
That really resonates with me, actually, because I hear what you're saying about we sometimes come to a situation, and people do this when they have children as well, like they expect the child to come in and heal them in some way, and it's like that's not the child's job. You have to heal yourself and cultivate your relationship with Krishna. You can't expect this newborn baby to come in and do that for you, and in fact they're just going to add to the pressure. So I think sometimes we approach these things thinking about what we can get out of them rather than what we can give. And we also, when we start, say, courting, or whatever term you want to use, I remember when I first met my husband, and we all do this, we bring our best representative to those meetings, don't we? Our best version of ourselves. We just do. We try to, do our best, be our best. And I suppose when you live with someone over a long period of time, you're going to see them when they're sick, when they're up, when they're down, when they're having struggles, when they're not. So you're not there sort of bringing your best self all the time. So I think that's the challenge, isn't it? It's moving through those times.
Well, I tell people when they're first meeting, I say, don't bring that false self. Bring the self you are. Show that to the person. If they don't like it, it's better they don't like it now than 5 years later when you have kids and they find it. So that's like, it's not fair. Be the what you see is what you get, not the what you see is not what you're going to get next year. The other thing that I see a lot, I can only speak for men, I can't speak for women, that I think people enter marriages, at least men, thinking they're going to get a lot more than they're going to give. And they've got maybe some idea, this is what I do as a man, and this is what a man gets. I read the Shastra, and it looks like I'm going to get, this. And I open the box, and it looked better in the picture. So I think that's important. That's what I find. A lot of people are just not prepared to make the compromises they have to make and fulfill the needs of their partner. They didn't realize that was part of the cost of marriage. And the sooner they realize that, the better.
That actually leads us really nicely into our next question, which was, how do you accept your partner as they are rather than as you wish that they were?
Can I go first, Jahnava? Yeah. That is such a simple question, because you can't do it any other way. That's the answer. I mean, the light's red. It's like you're asking me, when I run into a red traffic light, how can I accept it as it is? It's like, well, can you not accept a red light? Are you going to go through the red light? I mean, I know you're late and you're in a rush, but you can scream and yell, but it doesn't turn the light green. So the reality is that this is like such a big challenge for all of us, because We came into the material world not to accept things as they are, but to make them the way we wanted. And the big lesson is it doesn't work that way. And the sooner we can accept things as they are, more peaceful we'll become, and the more we can advance in spiritual life. And particularly in marriage, once you accept this is how my wife is, this is how my husband is, everything gets easy. You stop getting frustrated because you realize I am a certain way also. So I'm not
Yes.
perfect. I have my idiosyncrasies, and I know a lot about myself. Sometimes I wish I wasn't the way I am, but I realize that's just, I came in the world that way, introverted, extroverted, excited, dull, happy all the time, unhappy all the, so, okay, that's, your spouse gets to see that and go, okay, I can't change that. That nobody wants to be changed. You're not going to be happy when somebody's trying to change you. So as soon as you accept this is how my wife is, my husband is, it gets very easy. And then there's nothing to criticize now. Because, obviously you can talk about improving if your needs aren't being met and so forth. But I'm just speaking in general. I found it in my own life that acceptance makes everything easy. It makes relationships so much better.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We have a situation in our marriage where I'm a very organized person. My husband's incredibly unorganized. And the day that I just accepted he's unorganized, that is how he is. I am going to be organizing him for a long, long time. And I now you just don't argue about it. It's not a bone of contention anymore because I just accept, just as he's had to accept things about me, I'm just saying it from my side. I'm probably over organized and drive him a bit crazy, but he's unorganized. He'll lose his bank cards. He'll lose his medical card. He's scattered, right? So I just started kind of managing those things for him. And life is so much easier since I started doing that, rather than pointing out to him all the time, you're unorganized, you've lost something again, which actually in the end was just kind of affecting his self-confidence. Like, oh, maybe I am, I just accepted that's just how he is. Do you have anything to say, Jahnava Mata?
Yeah, that's really nice. I love how you took that and turned it around into something really positive and helpful, which is such a key for having a good relationship. There's a saying that goes, when you fight with reality, you lose 100% of the time. So we want things to be different than they are. And the more we invest and engage and wish and hope for that, the harder we're making our lives. Like we're swimming up the current instead of flowing down with the current. So, we just accept and then we act accordingly, right? So I love what you did. That's just a beautiful example. And I think what's so interesting is that we tend to get fixated on wanting our partner to change instead of looking at ourselves and seeing what can I change to make things easier for my partner. And so every time you see a fault in your partner, say, well, what fault do I have? What's one of my enduring vulnerabilities? And then focus on that. And then every time you think, well, I'm so good at this and he or she isn't, turn to them and think, well, what's one of their strengths? And so that way we tend to realize that it's not all about them, it's about us too.
It's almost like an inner mood that you need to cultivate, it sounds like.
Well, it's an inner mood, and it's just a simple thing. It's a mindfulness technique. And you catch yourself. Again, I go back to these two very powerful words, criticism and judgment. When we're critical and we're judgmental, then everything is spoiled. And when we can turn that criticism and judgment into positive things, like antidotes to them, right? Which is appreciation, then you can turn all that negative stuff around and your glass that's half empty becomes half full. And you're more focused on you and what you can do, because ultimately we can't change anyone, right? That is so out of our control. The only person we can change is ourselves. And that can be sort of like a magic, a little bit of a magic pill, right? Like if I'm willing to do the work for myself, and my husband's going to see that, and he's going to see this sort of positive change in me, it's going to inspire him to want to be better himself.
Mm.
So
As
it
opposed to
really,
like browbeating or nagging and just constantly
yeah,
saying,
why
you've done
can't
this,
you
you've
do
done
that?
that.
I wish
Yeah.
you could be like that. You have to turn all of that into yourself and think, where can I be more responsible? Where can I take more accountability? How can I improve? And so that's how we do that. Yeah.
There's something that I find interesting. There's one of the most fascinating things for me. How sometimes we find um, people, devotees, are very nice and they're not critical. And they get married and they become very critical of their spouse. Like when you're married, it's kind of like, well, it's okay. It's not opera. It's not criticism. It's just my spouse should be a certain way. I find that very interesting. My phone is actually dying now, so I have to get up and figure out how to charge it. So I'll be back in a minute.
That's okay. Do you want to continue, Jahnava Mata? Did you have anything to say about that? Accepting your partner as they are rather than you wish they are. I feel like what you were talking about was turning the attention inward rather than outward. And when you kind of cultivate yourself and look at your own anatas, then you kind of can then inspire that other person rather than continually bringing up maybe things that they consider shortcomings or that you consider shortcomings, and then constantly kind of bringing those up to that person, rather looking at yourself and your own self-improvement and then putting that out into the relationship.
Yeah. I mean, you said it perfectly. Another aspect to that is, every day we have a choice what to focus on in terms of what we see in our partner and in terms of the relationship, right? So let's say my partner's overweight and I just hate that, right? Because I'm really fit and active and I really value health, and he's kind of eats bad and he's like overweight and maybe a little lazy, and I don't, that bothers me. But he's such a good father. He's so good with kids, shout bath time and bedtime, and he takes them out and plays sports with them. So what do I want to focus on? His sloppy, overweight, messy, bad eating habits, or the fact that he is such an incredible dad? And I have that choice every day to decide what I'm going to focus on.
And that comes from you, not them, doesn't it? That comes from you.
Exactly. So I can fixate on the little things. I can be very nitpicky. And what happens when we focus on the negativity of the person is we build up this kind of internal resentment.
Yes.
And what happens is it builds and it builds and it builds. And then one day it's like a volcano and it explodes. And you could have spent all that building volcanic time focusing on the beautiful qualities that your spouse has. And that's our choice. And nobody can do that for us. So again, I tell people being in a healthy relationship is like, it's your second sadhana. We have our sadhana with Krishna, like our japa and the morning program and our reading. But our other sadhana is cultivating a healthy, meaningful, loving relationship with our spouse. And nobody can do that for us. And it doesn't just happen. Some people think that, well, I love him and he loves me, and that's going to be enough to sustain this really healthy relationship. And that's just not true. It's not enough in this world. Maybe 50, 100 years ago, it was enough, because the world was maybe not even 50, but like 100, right? It was enough because people just had way different expectations going into relationships. And it was more of a agreement that we will get married and we will raise kids and we will take care of the land and we'll feed ourselves and we'll survive. But it's not like that anymore. People go into relationships, like Mahatma Prabhu was saying earlier, with these really big, huge, grandiose expectations. And nobody can meet those needs and those expectations except God. And, you know, like my person and my soulmate, and all well and good. I hope everybody has their person and their soulmate, but their person and their soulmate will probably fall short of what they want, because no one can fill that hole with all those needs, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, physical, et cetera, except God, right? So when we're more realistic and we just want to, you know, focus in on what the person has that we can really value and appreciate and let them know, then that's where the magic can actually happen. You know, that's where you can grow in your relationship and do meaningful things and even leave a legacy, instead of getting stuck on this very low platform of resentment and anger. And I wish this and I wish that. And he's really let me down and she's really not the way I thought. So I'm getting a little lost.
Do you know what I really love that I want to pick up on what you said about you choose what you focus on. And you can choose to focus on the thing that you don't like so much, or you can choose to focus on the good things. So I'll use that example of, you know, me and my husband and the organization versus unorganization. You know, he compensates for me in other ways. You know, I used to get frustrated with it. I used to think, you know, because people from outside would say, oh, you know, why do you have to manage him? Why do you have to do this and that? And I used to let that affect me. And then I realized, actually, no, I'm doing the right thing by identifying, okay, I can help him with this because I'm organized. This is why Krishna put us together. So I can help him with that. And then I choose to focus my attention and my energy on the fact that he is such a present father. He's, you know, he's not afraid to roll his sleeves up and bath the children and put them to bed. He took care of them while I went to India to see my Guru Maharaj. Those are the things I want to focus on. You know, that him doing that, making that sacrifice for me, you know, that is huge compared to versus he's a bit unorganized, he'll forget his keys, he'll leave his phone places. I mean, that is so small compared to he took care of the children for 9 days while I went to Vrindavan to see my guru. You know, that is huge sacrifice that he made. So I think that choosing where you put your focus is such a good point, because we control that. We control where we put our focus.
Yeah. And what I was saying is that builds up. It builds up on both ends. And then you go for so long like that, it's very hard to let go of the resentment. You know, why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? And I don't understand this. I don't understand. And then, you know, that brings us to a lot of things like conflict and having good conversation and the getting inquisitive and being curious. You know, there are reasons. Maybe your husband, I'm totally making this up, I don't even know your husband, but, you know, maybe there's a really important reason why he's messy. Like, you know, something to do with his background. And maybe there's a really important reason, well, you're maybe like a neat freak that has something to do with your background. And maybe it has some connection to something meaningful and emotional with family and with trauma, like we don't know. And that's why I really have to find out, because if you understand that he's messy and this is why, and I'm
absolutely
okay with that. And yeah, she's a little neat freaky, but you know, that this is the reason. And I understand that. Then it's like, okay, you can just totally overlook it. You can even love it. It becomes endearing. It becomes
absolutely. That's what's happened. Yeah. I actually think it's sweet.
It can become endearing when you understand the history and the root cause of why they're like that.
Maybe
absolutely. Well, when he sorry, you go ahead, Mahatma Prabhu.
Maybe, you know, like somebody likes to be super organized, and if they're not, it causes them anxiety. Maybe it causes him anxiety to be too organized. I mean, it can be anything, you know. It's like, it feels good when it's a little, you know, chill and not everything in its place. Then I can relax. So we're all different.
And it's marrying that together, literally. And you know, like he
Yeah.
went out today and took the kids. I packed the bag for him. I made sure he had nappies and all of that stuff. You know, it's just, but like I said, there's other ways that he then comes to help me in situations. And so I feel like there's a balance. And I just really like what Jahnava Matta was saying about, you know, you make a decision what you choose to focus on. So I'm going to come to our next question. I feel like you kind of started addressing this, looking for the good in the person as opposed to the negative, and being a detective. Would you like to expand on that?
Do you want me to go first, or you want to go?
I can say something that you won't say. I don't think you'll. I know what she's going to say, so I try to say other things. I want to bring it back to the point I made before. Looking at what she's saying is not only appreciating, looking for the good, but like Jahnava was saying, trying to understand why somebody does it. There can be a whole history, and once you understand why they do that, it makes sense. Yeah. So sometimes devotees come to me and they say they're fighting a lot. And so I kind of joke with them. I say, "Oh, so you like to fight?" And everybody says, "No, we don't." I say, "Okay, you fight." And these are devotees who are telling me they fight all the time. I say, "You fight all the time, but you don't like to fight." Nobody fights all the time unless they like to fight. Just, like, now, but then I have a little fun with them. Like, could you tell me what verse that is? That you fight all the time with your wife? What's that verse? It's not the one that you're friend to all living entities. It's not the one that you're kind to all living entities. It's not the one where the devotee has no enemies, etc., etc. So we are supposed to come together, man and woman, in an ashram to help one another. So it becoming the home becoming a battlefield doesn't help anybody. It's tamasic. And so, if you look at things philosophically, like what is the culture of your home? What kind of culture do you want to create at home? You want to create an adversarial relationship at home? You want to raise kids in that environment? It's completely tamasic. Now we're devotees. We're supposed to be cultivating sattva guna. So, like I said before, it's like somebody could be very sattvic, very into deity worship, and then in terms of relationships, completely tamasic. And we need to, hone up to that, own that. That is not, and we can't write it off. Well, it's just my family and my wife. No, Krishna consciousness is 24/7. So I find that home life is where you practice. That's the best place to practice. Do it at home because it's the hardest to do at home. It's easy to be nice to other people, hard to be nice to the ones closest to you. And so what are we supposed to practice? Understanding, appreciation. We're not supposed to practice criticism. We're supposed to avoid it. So it's like, in one sense, if you just divorce it from the topic of marriage and just talk about Krishna consciousness, it all makes sense, right? Oh yeah, we should appreciate devotees, we should serve, we should understand, empathetic.
Be
But
tolerant and humble with them as well.
All the things you learn in the Bhakti program. And then we bring it into the family and somehow or other something goes wrong. And I think a lot of devotees just, they kind of lose sight of, like, the reason you married is not to stay in the material world, is not to enjoy the world. The reason you married is to get out of the material world, and you and your partner together work together to become liberated. And one of the ways you become liberated is first is rising in the modes of nature. So if you come together and everything becomes tamasic, it's completely counterproductive. You've come together and you've produced the very thing that should not happen in a marriage.
So you're kind of setting yourself back, I guess, wouldn't you be? You'd be
worse. Yeah, worse than that. You're worse off. So I think a lot of devotees, they enter grihastha life and they lose kind of the ashram side of it, and they're thinking about the enjoyment side. And so I want them to be my wife, but they're not the way I wanted them to be. Like I was saying before, they didn't realize what they were getting into. So I think it's always nice to have this model in mind that we want to create a Krishna conscious culture at home. What would that look like? And if we're doing things that aren't Krishna conscious, we have to figure out why are we doing them, how to stop it, and how we can help one another so we can create that culture. Otherwise, as we see, and as my wife sees all the time, We can create extremely dysfunctional, toxic cultures when two nice devotees come together. And so something is wrong there, and it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way.
Some really nice reflections. Do you have anything to add, Jahnava Mata?
I love what Mahatma Prabhu said. Yeah, I think that just developing a culture of appreciation, it starts at home, and then whatever you bring from the home is what you bring out into the world. And I think a lot of people don't realize that it's like I have my home life and then I have the rest of my life. And that's not really integrated and balanced. And people won't really get what you have to offer. So if you can be your best version of yourself in the home and treat the people in your home with due respect and consideration and courtesy, then it all starts there. And then you just bring that out. And so you're going to be way more impactful to the people in your life, whatever sphere of work or service that you're in. And also, whatever happens in the home, whatever culture you create with your spouse is the culture that you're passing on to your children.
Absolutely.
So if you and your spouse are bickering and arguing and not getting along nicely, then you are teaching your children to do that, not only with each other, but with their spouses when it's their turn to get married. And you're also robbing them from the opportunity to become caring, compassionate individuals and emotionally balanced individuals as they grow. And you're also passing on sort of toxic, stressful hormones that they're going to take on, and it's going to show in their relationships with their peers and in their schoolwork. And we don't realize how much our association with our partners, how much it affects our children and the way that they bring themselves out into the world. So for people who want to go out and save the planet and, you know, do all these incredible things and distribute thousands of books and build big temples and preach, just start at home with the few little people that you have in your little sphere and make that good. If you can have nice relationships with the people in your home, then Krishna will bless you and he will let you go out and extend that further and further. But if you can't even do it at home, you're not going to be very successful out into the world. So it's that one pebble that you throw into the river. And then from that one little circle, many, many circles come out. But it all starts with you and your spouse and your children.
I really love those last few points that you made, because I feel like sometimes devotees are so engrossed with like the temple and what's happening there, they kind of almost forget that their home is an ashram. It's the Grihasta ashram, and that your children are devotees, and when you serve them, and your husband or your wife, you're serving devotees, you're serving them, and you're setting an example for them. Like me and my kids go out on book distribution together. It's something we really like doing together. And, you know, sometimes we come back and we've only distributed like 3 books or something. And you may say, oh, that's a really, really low number. If I went out by myself, I could probably distribute a lot more books. But we love doing it together, and we do it so I can sort of show them, like, you know, we're serving Prabhupada. That's the most important thing. We're giving people a good impression of devotees. And it really brings us together, doing that together, rather than me going off and doing it separately and then maybe leaving them with someone, or, you know, maybe it would arguably be more successful if I went by myself. But there's just something really nice about us going together. And I just love those reflections of what you were saying about cultivate the Grihasta ashram and then work outwards. How do you treat the people in your immediate ashram? How are you interacting with them on a day-to-day level, and then go from there? Because we, you know, sometimes we just forget that they are devotees and they were given to us to raise in Krishna consciousness. And sometimes I just feel like they sometimes get a little overlooked. So I'm going to come in with my next question. Random acts of kindness and showing appreciation. How can we do that and cultivate that in our Grihasta ashram?
Yeah, so everybody's familiar with that term, random acts of kindness. And we do it with strangers all the time, or whenever we think of it and we feel really good about what we just did. So we have to practice that in our home with our spouses. So when we see that, they've lagged behind with something, making the bed or folding the towel or putting the dishes away, or I don't know, whatever it is, most of us are thinking, oh my gosh, it's their turn and they didn't do it. And I can't believe it. He's so sloppy. And, here I go again. But actually, the right thing to do is just do it and say, can I help you? Or I did that for you, because I saw you were running late, or here, let me help you out cooking dinner, or just have this mood of being helpful and cooperative and not feeling like they have to earn it, right?
Yeah.
Or that they have to like beg for it, or you're going to withhold because you don't think they deserve it. That is a very low vibrational mentality to have with the person that you really want to feel has your back and you have theirs. There was this experiment done where they had a couple, and so they put the woman in an MRI, and they told her that as it goes up, you might feel some shocks a little bit here and there, so you'll be okay. So it really hurt, right? And then her spouse came and he held her hand, and the same thing happens, and she didn't feel any pain. She said, it's tingly, but because he was there holding her hand. And the point is, when you feel that there is someone there who's going to be there for you, no matter what you're going through, Dr. John Gottman, who I studied with, says, when my wife is in pain, the world stops. So when there's a sense of safety, and there's a lack of safety when you're withholding, when you're arguing, when you're holding on to resentment, when you're keeping check and tabs of who's done what, it's I'm my turn. Like, there's just a lack of safety in the relationship. And that's when you're not actually getting your sort of primordial human needs as a householder met. And it really impedes your sense of wellness and health and well-being, materially, spiritually, emotionally, the whole thing. So when we can contribute to the relationship in supporting the idea that I'm here for my partner, I've got his back, I've got her back. When he's in pain, the world stops and I'm there for them. When you can contribute in that way, that is probably the greatest thing that you can experience as a human being. Really, that's about as high as it gets on the material plane in a relationship, when you can both provide that for each other and feel that. So the random acts of kindness concept in a home is like that. Not like, pick that up, you dropped it, or no, I'm not helping you because you didn't help me, or all that stuff is like, yeah, sure, I'll help you, absolutely, no.
That kind of tit for tat sort of mentality, like, or you didn't do it, so I'm not going to do it, or that kind of thing. It's like, it's not a competition, it's like, actually you do your best, and then the other person will be more likely to respond, I think, as well, favorably. Wonderful. Do you have anything to add, Mahatma Prabhu?
Yes. Could you imagine that a non-devotee is hearing us having this conversation and thinking, I can't believe that you spiritual people would act that way. This is so out of character of what we would understand to be spiritual. I'm just listening to this conversation like I'm observing it and thinking, how do we end up in this mess? This is so far from Krishna consciousness. This is like nursery school, kindergarten. Now, boys and girls, be nice to one another, share your toys. I just find it,
Unfortunately, it's kind of true, isn't it? Even the way we interact with each other in the temple,
yeah,
like
yeah.
sometimes I see it and I think if I was someone coming to the temple for the first time seeing this, I would just think, because you come to Krishna consciousness, I know as an adult, and I kind of almost expected there to be like a higher bar, like a higher level. And then when I came and I saw like the same sort of things happening, I was like, oh, okay. And then like, you realize, well, we're all just people struggling in this material world in Kali Yuga, like under the influence of the modes. Sorry, please continue. I interrupted you.
So wouldn't it be nice if two people come together and they bring out the best in one another, not the worst in one another? Because basically that's what we see. It's either going to bring out the best or they're going to bring out the worst. And how we as individuals need to process this is we have to be introspective. We have to be able to work on ourselves. Like John was saying, you can't just say it's the other person's fault and try to change them. And when you change, I'll be better. That's all very immature stuff. So we find when people enter marriages who have personal issues that are unresolved, it can become huge problems in the relationship because they will tend to become victims and make excuses and criticize their partner and so on. And this is not Krishna consciousness. That's my point. This is, I think, devotees really, if they back off a little bit and just, take a deep breath and ask themselves, what is Krishna consciousness and what is wrong with me that these problems are happening in the marriage, and how can I grow? How can I mature spiritually and emotionally? There's so much that we can learn about ourselves in marriage, and so many ways we can grow in marriage. And I think it's extremely important when people get married to be conscious of this. I know so many people will call me, write me, I want to get married, and I know they're thinking about their needs only. They're not thinking about what it means. They're not thinking about, I have this issue and that issue, and maybe I should heal that before I enter a marriage. Maybe I won't be a good spouse if I bring this issue in. And then wrongly, sometimes they think the marriage will heal that.
Yeah.
So that's important to, be ready to reflect and heal and work on yourself. Otherwise, you're going to end up criticizing your spouse because it's your own weakness, because you don't want to face your own issues. You'd rather blame someone else for your problems. And that's never going to work. And there's no way a marriage is going to last in that environment.
Do you know what I find is a little bit helpful in our house, and we do this like most days, is we sing your children's song, The Qualities of a Devotee, together.
Oh.
And I know it sounds really like kindergarten, but you actually need reminding, I think, every day of what the qualities of a devotee actually are. Or at least I do, and we all do. And so we sing that lovely children's song that's in English, so everyone understands it. My husband's not studying Sanskrit, so we don't do the Sanskrit, we do the song and what the qualities of a devotee actually are. And when you meditate on those and cultivate those, then that's going to then shine through in all of your relationships and your interactions, I feel. It's such a beautiful song. Thank you so much for making those children's songs, by the way. They're really, really helpful. They're really beautiful. Do you have anything to add, Jahnava Mata?
Yeah, she sang that song.
Oh, beautiful. I didn't realize. We listen to this every day. Like my kids absolutely love those songs.
A long time ago.
They're still going strong.
That's so good.
Yeah, no, my kids love them.
Yeah.
Well,
so
you want to hear something? You want to hear something funny? I used to think, because I teach seminars, I used to think I should do a seminar, and the title would be "Everything You Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten, Nursery School, whatever you call it in your country." And then later I heard that somebody actually did somebody, not a devotee, did a workshop like that. Maybe a different title, but be nice, be kind, share, be respectful, don't blame, take responsibility, all these things. So you have to be mature to be a good spouse.
I just wanted to say that the thing about householder life is so much of it is common sense. But what happens is our egos get in the way. And then it's not about the truth anymore. It's just about, I need to be right. I'm right and you're wrong, because that makes my ego feel better. So when we can get the ego out of the way, I say ego versus essence. When we can act from essence, meaning the soul, versus ego, then things are very smooth. But when it's the ego, it's clash of the titans. Nobody's going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So this kind of leads perfectly into our next question, actually. How does one deal with conflict, especially in the here and now, rather than allowing those conflicts to kind of build up and build resentment? And I think anyone in a marriage knows if you leave things, they can fester basically, and they can kind of build up. And then at some point it will come out. So that's my next question to you. Dealing with conflicts, do you have any suggestions with that?
You want to start, or should I start?
It depends how much you like to fight. Going back to my other, it depends how much, do you need to be right? Is winning important? Have you ever heard that saying, you want to be right or you want to be married? So
Yeah.
you want to be right or you want to be happy? You want to be right or blank? So, but Jahnava was talking earlier about some of the problems in marriage and how sometimes spouses treat one another so poorly. I was once asked to give a workshop on marriage or talk about marriage, and it was just a class, like an hour class. And I said, be nice to your spouse. Does anyone have any questions? Because everything we're talking about boils down to being nice. And sometimes being nice is like, for some reason, becomes extremely difficult. And so, if you can't be nice, if you're, like Jahnava was saying, it's all about ego, I'm right, I need to be right, I need to dominate, then we don't want to argue on that level. If we want to argue in a way that's going to help the marriage, not destroy it. And there's ways to argue that'll help it, and there's ways to argue that will destroy it. So Jahnava can tell you, because I have to give another class now. So I'm going to have to say
so much.
Goodbye to all of you.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. And Jahnava is more than well equipped to answer all these questions.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mahatma. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, so conflict is unavoidable in a marriage. And studies show that even couples who argue, many say they have a happy relationship. So if you're arguing, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong. But how do you argue? What happens? Does it bring you closer together, or does it send you into opposite sides of a boxing ring, only to come back and put your gloves on and start, duking it out again, right? Or does it both bring you both to a point where you are willing to be vulnerable and be inquisitive and be curious and be willing to listen and feel validated and heard? So the interesting thing is that arguing can be a great catalyst for becoming closer, but you kind of have to know the art of how to do it in a way that's not going to send you in opposite corners of alienation and disconnection.
So that's constructive rather than destructive.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now that sounds really easy, right? But it's difficult because everybody has a different arguing style. And some people are comfortable with conflict and arguing and talking it out, and they want to talk it out right now until it's resolved. And then other people, they want to talk it out, but not till tomorrow, till they've had some time to just sleep on it. And then other people, they don't want to argue it at all, talk about it at all. They want to sweep it under the rug. And so different people have different conflict styles. And you kind of have to know your conflict style and your partner's conflict style, and then figure out how you're going to meet somewhere in the middle to make it work. So both of you feel heard and understood, and both of you feel like you've been able to say what you want to say without being criticized and judged and knocked down. See, that's where this lack of safety comes in arguments. And that's where this sense of losing each other and wanting to go in separate ways, because it doesn't feel safe anymore to have a conversation about a difficult topic. So arguing is an art, and we don't really have time to cover that today. But I would say, just do your research, figure out what's your conflict style. What's your spouse's conflict style? Learn about how to have a healthy argument / discussion where it leads you to a better place instead of a worse place. And don't shy away from it. Don't avoid it, but then don't force if your partner is not ready. So it's really interesting to learn about it and figure out
sounds
how
like
to do it. It's like a dance.
Yeah.
Let me use.
I was literally just going to say that. It sounds like a dance. Yeah, that you've got to learn, because every partner's different.
Right. So every marriage is like a dance, and one of my teachers uses the tango as a good example. So when you're really in sync, the tango is very fast. It can be very fast paced, and there's all these flips and turns and dips. And so when you're really in sync and you really feel safe, you can do all that fancy footwork and fancy dips and turns. But when it's not safe, it's like very slow and there's a lot of trepidation. So figure out your tango, and figure out how to do your tango so each of you feels safe and held by the other partner, and you feel that you can hold your partner as well. Yeah.
Do you know what I think an important aspect of that is? And I mean, it's only because I've, seen it in friends' marriages, being really mindful that when you are having an argument / discussion, not to use like derogatory terms or like name call, or even if it's not, it seems minor, like saying, you're unorganized, or labeling the person even. I think that's when an argument / discussion becomes very destructive.
Right.
And then what ends up happening is that person will then hang on to that statement.
Right.
And that will either languish in their mind, or it will come back up later. And I really, one of the things that, me and my husband made a decision very early on was, when we have an argument / discussion, we will never ever digress into like saying any, labeling the other person or saying you're a bad person or this. Never do we ever want to go into that territory. And we made that choice and just had that discussion very, very early on, because we didn't want our children to hear that. I've been married before, I'm divorced, it's my second marriage, and I can remember my past partner would say things like, oh, she's silly and this to the children. And then the children would go, silly mummy. And then so that used to really, really bother me, because then they learn, oh, mummy's silly. She doesn't know what she's doing. So, and that can also work the other way as well, for if you say things about the husband. So what I try not to do, and what my husband tries not to do, is use like really critical language, even if we're not agreeing on something, and it can happen where we're not agreeing on something, but we won't start labeling the other person or putting the other person down or calling them names or anything like that. We try and really stay away from that. And I just wanted to share that, because I feel like that's something that's worked really positively in our marriage.
Right.
And it's a simple thing that anyone can do.
Great awareness, and that's great observation. And that's actually, a key to having a successful marriage. We call it a harsh startup. So that would be, you're so silly, or you're so lazy.
Yeah.
Versus a gentle startup, which is, it would be great if you could, clean up after yourself. I'd appreciate it so much. Or, it'd be great if we didn't laugh so much during this, because it's really serious for me. So it's not what you say, but how you say it. Right?
Yes, it's in the delivery.
You can request, or you can express a need, or even express a complaint. But if you use critical words by telling people they're this, they're that, pointing out personality defects or flaws. It's like a spear to their heart, right?
Yes.
Actually, the studies show that when couples fight and argue and attack each other verbally, emotionally, it can be compared to stepping on a really sharp nail. That's how painful it is. There's virtually no difference between the pain of getting attacked and criticized by your significant other and stepping on a really sharp nail. So when you get those attacks, and like you said, they stay in there, and then you ruminate on it, and then there's no chance for clearing up the conflict. So I love how you and your husband have made a commitment, almost like a vow, that when you're going to address a difficult topic, you're going to avoid using critical, judgmental, hurtful, contemptuous words, and you're going to speak in a way that's respectful, even if it's a difficult conversation. So we have to choose our words wisely. And I like to give the example of when children really want something from their parents, right? They come up like kind of sweet and cute and a little smile and mommy, please have that. They don't say, I want this now. And if you don't give it to me, I'm leaving the house forever, right? They wouldn't get it. They would probably be put in their time out or punished or whatever parents do for discipline. But if they came up really sweet and gentle and kind, then the parent would say, sure, sweetie, or we can't do it now, but tonight we'll go and get that. So
you get a more favorable response, don't you, with that approach?
So no matter what it is, a request or a need or a hope or a desire, it's all about how we say it. Yeah. So I love
absolutely.
that you have that's part of your family culture.
I think one of the, and there's not lots of benefits, but one of the few benefits of having been married before, divorced and remarried is you really learn a lot from that, of what you don't want to cultivate and what you don't want in your relationship. And then, when you move into that next relationship, because we both had children, we were both divorced, we literally sat down and said, right, this is what I'm looking for. These are my expectations. We had really, really frank discussions early on. And I think I'd really encourage anybody to do that, to sit down and have those conversations. How are we going to deal with conflict? How do you want to raise the children so that there's, and you're not always going to agree. My husband is a little bit stricter and I'm a little bit more like, let them be. And then we have to kind of meet in the middle at times. But we've always got this kind of running discussion that never runs into the territory of, oh, well, you're really strict and that's really horrible. And all, do you know what I mean? Like we try and deal with it in such a way that's productive and constructive, and doesn't injure the other person. So,
so you're saying the experience that you had from that has been so helpful in helping you set up a foundation and a culture. And I think that's just a really good point. I'll just say really quickly is that a lot of couples, they go into a marriage. I mentioned it earlier. They think just if they love each other, that's going to be enough.
Yeah.
But when we come to a marriage, we bring so much baggage with us. Even if we had a good upbringing, we still bring all kinds of baggage. We bring everything that we saw our parents do or didn't do. And by default, subconsciously, we just do that. And it's not usually or necessarily going to work in this particular relationship. And then people wonder like why things aren't working. And basically, you need training. So I always recommend people who aren't married yet to get premarital counseling. I think that is the surest way that you can avoid the pitfalls and avoid having to make so many mistakes that other people have made. And you can just start out on such a strong foundation and have such a clear, good trajectory and just save years of trouble and pain and trial and error. So I really do want to emphasize anyone out there listening, if you're thinking of getting married or you're just newly married or you're engaged, get some premarital counseling for sure.
I agree because
it's such an investment that's worth millions.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think having a period of time be different for everybody, where you have to kind of go inward and heal your own wounds before you enter into that relationship. And I'd also say, especially before you have children, very,
Yeah.
very important. Like, I had cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm just using myself as an example. Before I had my son, and because I knew I had some unhealed wounds, and I then didn't want to kind of bring all that trauma into that relationship, because that
Yeah.
child or your spouse, that's not their role. They're not there to heal you and fix you. You're supposed to be having this like cooperative relationship and serving Krishna together. So having that counseling and that healing, I think that's a really, really
Yeah.
wonderful suggestion. So,
Yeah.
because I was going to ask you, how do you, if you want to reach out and get help, how can someone do that?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of ways. They can go to their local community. There's a Vaishnav resource website for counselors and therapists, and there's just so many ways. It just depends on where you live and who your community is, and just ask around. But I do really support that. They say it takes an average of 7 years from the time a couple identifies a problem in their marriage that's not going away, an average of 7 years before they actually go and get help. But that's 7 years that you have to unravel all of that. So prevention is so much more powerful than waiting all those years. So, don't be too proud. Don't think that there's something wrong with you if you feel like your relationship needs some support or tweaking or improvement. That is the sign of emotional intelligence, as opposed to kind of, spiritual bypassing or emotional bypassing, and just thinking, oh, somebody will think I'm weak if I do this, or, people will talk about it. That's just nonsense. That's just not true at all. People are respected when they're honest and truthful about where they're at, and then they go and they get the help they need, and then they see improvements. So I would say don't hesitate.
I agree. Don't try and save face. I think sometimes we all want to put out that our children are perfect and our house is perfect and our marriages are perfect, and actually 9 times out of 10, not everything can be perfect. And we're all in a process with our children, with our partners, with cultivating our grihastha ashram and bringing all of that together. And we've had counseling various times, and we've had counseling on our own, we've had counseling together. I can't rate it enough. I think it's wonderful. I think it's really important to find the right counselor, and I think it does help when they are a devotee. But there's lots of counseling, marriage counseling places around here in Australia. We have Relationships Australia that has like a sliding scale payment system. So there are resources out there. But I think it would be wonderful to see some more marriage devotee counselors sort of coming through, because we are so influenced by our sastra, and we have sometimes, I would say, slightly different ways of doing things than the rest of mainstream society, so there's that as well. But yeah, I couldn't agree more that reaching out and getting help is, don't put it off, like why put it off, basically. Yeah,
Perfect.
do you have any other points you want to make, or should we wrap up?
Not that I can think of.
I think we've covered everything, haven't we? Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me, you and Mahatma Prabhu, for joining me today and talking about this topic and making the time for all of us today. So thank you so much, Jahnava Mata, for that.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. For everyone that's watching, thank you so much for joining us live. We had about 15 people joining us live today. This video will be up on the YouTube channel. Please do share it and subscribe. And I just wanted to let everyone know that on Saturday, the 26th of November, I'm going to be speaking to Sri Radha Padmalaya Devi Dasi. She's from New Govardhan here in Australia. She's grown up in the movement, and she teaches Bhagavatam, and she teaches these beautiful classes. She's even written a children's book. She's really inspirational. So she'll be coming on the podcast. So not next weekend, but the weekend after. But the full schedule's on the Facebook page and the Instagram page as well. So thank you for joining us, everyone, and see you in a couple of weeks. Hari Bol.